Hello, and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer in Tel Aviv. In what may be the definition of too little, too late, the Israeli government announced suddenly over last weekend that it was both beginning airdrops of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, that it would allow safe corridors for the United Nations and other agencies to deliver food, and that there would be, quote, humanitarian pauses implemented in 3 areas of the Gaza Strip in zones where Israeli forces are not operating, again, in coordination with the UN and international organizations to distribute aid. The moves are a tacit admission of the total failure of the alternative route of humanitarian aid through the hastily constructed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where daily Palestinian Gazans seeking food have been killed and injured as they crowded to these limited locations, and images of starving Gazans, particularly children and babies, have been shocking and horrifying the world. One of Haaretz's team of journalists who is covering the dire situation on the ground in Gaza is Nagham Zbeedat. She speaks daily with Gazans, and she joins me on the podcast today to share their voices. Nagham was also present at weekend demonstrations in the cities of Sakhnin and Haifa, where over 10,000 Israeli, Palestinian, and Jewish citizens gathered to protest the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. She'll talk about that growing movement inside Israel as well. And along with Nagham, we'll hear from Haaretz reporter Linda Diane, who'll tell us about parallel demonstrations in Tel Aviv as the mainstream Jewish citizens of Israel, horrified at what is being done in their name, are trying to pressure the Netanyahu government to do whatever it takes to feed and rescue Gazans. Our conversations coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Nagham Zbeedat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Nagham, you've been in daily contact with Palestinians in Gaza since the very beginning of the war, and you've reported on their daily struggles. We know that things have been going from bad to worse. Can you tell us about what you're hearing about their lives right now and how things have evolved since the war began nearly 2 years ago?
The situation in Gaza has gone from bad to unbearable, and every day feels heavier, more hopeless. What used to be a struggle to survive has become a fight into just remaining a human being in Gaza. Whether it's a starvation, bombing, or endless loss. So life has completely changed over the past 2 years in Gaza. Not in the way that life is supposed to evolve, but how human beings in Gaza has changed their fight from survival to remaining human. Houses, homes, and hospitals has become shelters that were leveled to the ground.
Nagham, I've asked you to share some of the voices you've been hearing directly from Gaza to our listeners. Can you tell us about Hana, who we'll hear from now?
Yeah, Hana, she's 30 years old, a woman from northern Gaza. She lives in Nusayrat refugee camps now. She's basically the main provider for her father. He's old, he's sick, and her parents were separated early on in her life. So she's struggling on a daily basis to provide for herself and for her father.
This is Hana telling Nagham about herself, her life, and her daily battle to feed her family.
Hello, I am Hana. I'm 32 years old and I am from Gaza. What can I say about the life right now? We are living through a genocide for the past 21 months. Can you imagine? 21 months. Life is heavy. It's tough. We're just trying to survive every day. To be honest, life was already tough before the war. But now, it's even harder. It's a disaster. The situation is inhuman and brutal to everyone in Gaza. Children, women, men, everyone here in Gaza is suffering. I lost my job because of the situation. I lost my main source of income. So the first challenge I faced during the war is providing my family with food, medicine, water. So I spent all my savings just trying to get my family something to eat, something to drink. And we used to live in a beautiful home, but in some point we had to evacuate and leave everything behind us and move into a tent. It's miserable. It's cold. It's tough. Actually, I don't want to remember these days. Thanks God now we're back to our home, even if we only just use 2 rooms of our house because the rest of our house is damaged. We can't use the other rooms, but it's still much better than living in a tent. For me and for my family, the situation is very hard. I'm kind of the main provider for my family since my dad is sick and my parents are separated. So my little siblings count on me to provide them for their basic needs. One of the hardest moments for me, it was when we didn't have any clean water to drink. So we sent my little sister, and she's only 9, to get some water. And she had to stand in a long line to get us some water. And oh my God, when I saw that line, it was full of kids. I thought they should have been at school or just playing, not standing there with empty bottles. It really broke my heart.
While Hana was recording this for us, she suddenly had to stop and you didn't hear from her for a while. And then we received this sad message from her.
I am so sorry, I can't do it. You wanted me to talk about the situation in Gaza, and here is it. While I was recording for the podcast, I received a news about my friend that he's gone. He just died. This is the situation in Gaza.
You also spoke, Nagham, to a young man named Abdel Halim, who lives in northern Gaza, which has been relatively cut off from the flow of humanitarian aid when compared to the south. Can you tell us about him and some of what he told you about his life?
Abdel Halim. Abdel Halim is a 24-year-old computer science student, former student before the war. However, during the war, his studies, his dream has shattered, and now he's mainly providing for his family through GoFundMe links and campaigns that his friends from outside of Gaza help collect money for him and his family.
Are a lot of Gazans turning to online sources in order to survive?
Unfortunately, yes, because there is no job in Gaza, there is no employment, and there is no cash flow in Gaza. Therefore, a lot of people are resorting to online campaigns using friends from abroad or like basically activists, whoever could help them collect money from online campaigns.
You wrote a rather shocking story in Haaretz about young women who have gone online and they've been basically asked to prostitute themselves in return for aid?
Yeah, unfortunately, being vulnerable online and living amidst the chaos and out of control Gaza now has become a really dangerous place for everyone, but especially for women who are the main provider for their families. And now they have to cope with these harassments and sexual exploitation that they go through. with no legal precautions or regards.
So coming back to Abdel Halim, Nagham asked him to write to her, telling her about his experiences seeking food. And here's a summary read for us of what he wrote.
Yesterday, aid entered after a few days of nothing. But the trucks stop in dangerous areas and the army shoots at them. It becomes literally like a jungle. The strong take and the weak don't get anything. I went 3 times to the 8 distribution points, and each time was no different from the other. We went after midnight, there was no lighting at all, complete darkness everywhere. We sat on the burned ground, which was basically sand and rubble, and waited. Every now and then, the Navy boats would come closer and start shooting randomly, and we'd have to run and take cover behind or inside the trenches in the ground. And when the boats weren't firing, the automated crane the army had set up would start shooting at us. No aid trucks entered that day. Even if they had, people would have been exhausted already, spending hours just running from the gunfire. And of course, there were martyrs and wounded people. There was this guy I met, he was sleeping next to me on the ground. Suddenly people said, "They're letting trucks in." So we got up and moved closer to try to get something. As we got closer, the crane started firing again, and we started running. I ran and found cover, and nothing happened to me. I looked around for the guy, but couldn't find him. Suddenly, I saw people carrying him. He'd been shot in the back. The war has taken everything from me, literally. But the bigger problem is that I'm responsible for my mother and younger siblings. I'm draining myself just to try and provide them with something barely human.
Nagham, is Abdel Halim's experience reflective of what you hear from Gazans, particularly in the north, about this horrifying sounding process of trying to get humanitarian aid for their families?
Sadly, yes, this experience is tragically reflective of what many in Gaza are going through or have gone through over the past 2 years. The chaos, the danger. Thousands of people in Gaza have had similar incidents, experiences at what's so-called aid distribution points, where receiving basic necessity has become a life-threatening experience. The random gunfire, the lack of security, the exhaustion, and the trauma of going there and seeing someone who you know or you don't know getting killed for basically getting bread for their family is not a one-time incident, but it has become a pattern that every Gazan has experienced.
Now, I'm after hearing these stories and, living in day-to-day Israeli society where so many people are denying this reality, saying it's not true, it's exaggerated. How does that make you feel?
Angry, because I dare to say it's the first time in history that we witness a live stream starvation war committed against people, unarmed people, and yet we still deny these crimes because we want to protect our own safety, our own security, or our own comfort. And basically we are building a fictional life on the corpses and ashes of those people who are killed.
Nagham, you yourself are a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Over the weekend, you went to some remarkable demonstrations in the cities of Sakhnin, where you live, and in the city of Haifa. Can you tell us about your experiences there and the other parallel demonstrations in Arab and mixed towns and cities in Israel that took place and hopefully are pointing to an end to the denial and a beginning to some sort of outcry against what's happening in Gaza?
Both of them are very important. Any demonstration or protest voicing out the demands to end the war is important. However, the one in Sakhnin, no matter how emotional and impactful it was, to me, it's more important to have demonstrations and protests in mixed cities because basically we need a united voice calling for the end of the war. We do not need one where it's organized and where it's calling for partnership between Jewish Israelis and Arabs in Israel because we do not have time for these calls. Each minute we are losing a life in Gaza. And we should utilize this time that we have to call for an end of the war, to end the starvation, instead of calling for coexistence and partnership.
Nagham, you interviewed one of the participants in the Sakhnin demonstration. She asked that her name not be used on the podcast, but can you tell us a little bit about her before we hear from her?
Yeah, she's a nurse. She's 26 years old from Sakhnin. She works at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. That's why she asked for her name not to be used in the podcast. It's also important to highlight that she was one of the protesters that went on a hunger strike during the protest. Some of them used to drink salt water as a symbolic act of solidarity to show that Palestinians, whether in Sakhnin, in Haifa, or in Gaza, are going through the same pain and struggle.
So this is what Nagham's interviewee, the nurse from Sakhnin, who works at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, had to say.
My voice matters, and everyone of us being in the street matters. So Israel sees that we are part of our people. The protest should have focused more on the hunger in Gaza, not on demands for the rights as citizens inside Israel. I don't want my right as an Israeli citizen. I want my rights as a Palestinian. I want my people to live in freedom. I want the starvation of 2 million people to end. I want the border to open and the genocide to stop. It's our job as a part of the Palestinian people inside Israel not to stop protesting for every person in Gaza dying from hunger and bombings.
Nagham, after experiencing the demonstrations in Sakhnin and Haifa and learning about the others, which were, I understand, organized by a variety of organizations, not one main organizing body, do you feel like they were effective, powerful? Was the message out there? Do you think that they're going to make a difference?
They were powerful. The message that was received by Palestinians in Gaza is that Palestinians in Israel, or Jewish Israelis actually, are there for you, fighting for you. It's not, you're not forgotten, and we will keep fighting for you. However, whether these demonstrations will make any change or any difference in terms of governmental and authority, I don't believe so, which is also what makes this situation is harder and causes more frustration among protesters who join these protests out of duty, out of feeling we are doing something, we're not staying silent. However, they go there, they participate full aware that their demonstrations and protests won't end the war at the moment.
So these numbers were impressive, right? Tens of thousands of people showed up.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it will continue or that this was a one-time thing?
The demonstrations in the Arab towns are still scheduled over the upcoming week. So hopefully we will still have more of people coming up and showing up. Maybe the demonstration in Sakhnin helped Palestinians in Israel who were keeping low profile break the wall of fear, as they refer to it.
Nagham, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me.
Protests and demonstrations centering the humanitarian crisis in Gaza have not been limited to the Arab sector. Joining me now is Haaretz reporter Linda Diane, who has been covering the protest movement since the beginning of the war. Linda, Gazans have been suffering for a long time now. Do you feel like something has tipped the scale this time for Jewish Israelis whose voices have primarily been heard on the streets until this moment, calling for hostage release, calling for a ceasefire, but not pointing to the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza?
Previously, when you would talk about a ceasefire, the messaging that you were hearing at protests, say for the hostages, was we need to bring home the hostages and we need to end the war. And we also can't have one without the other, is part of the thinking. Over the past, I would say, week and a half, you start seeing people in the mainstream Israeli society, including the mainstream Israeli media, talking about the plight of the average Gazan, talking about starvation, talking about the collapse of all of the aid mechanisms and the inability to find food and basic necessities. And it's really starting to enter the protest movements and the way that we talk about the situation over there.
But the protests seem to be separated, right? There are the protests, the mainstream, or the protests that have been going on since the beginning of the war calling for ceasefire and hostage release. And then these protests that are focused on humanitarian aid to Gaza seem to be something relatively new and relatively separate. Can you explain that?
So earlier last week, there was a protest organized by the Jewish-Arab coexistence group Standing Together, where they held up pictures of children in Gaza and they hauled sacks of flour on their back. And they did a march to bring awareness to this plight of Gazans, of starvation, of pain. But at the same time, on Thursday night, when there was a mass anti-war rally calling for a ceasefire, calling for an end to all of the fighting, it was kind of mentioned, if at all, as an aside. The messaging is still very much, this war is killing the hostages. This war is killing our soldiers. We don't have enough children to feed to this war. And sometimes at the same time, people will say, starvation isn't one of our values. There's no need to be doing this. There are innocent people who are suffering. But it isn't necessarily being worked into the broader umbrella of all of the protests. But as you mentioned, the protests for a long time have been very segmented. You have 2 separate hostage protests happening each Saturday night, in addition to a large anti-war protest at Habima Square. So you have 3 protests happening concurrently that are all asking for the same thing, but are going about it in very different ways. So it's the same with this particular issue as well.
Linda spoke to Alon Lee Green, one of the leaders of the group that she mentioned, Standing Together, and here's what he had to say about the demonstration that they organized.
Seeing the videos, seeing the photos coming from Gaza, understanding that this is the reality, that it's not a campaign, as some journalists or politicians say. It's not a campaign to say there is starvation, there is starvation. A lot of these Israelis are asking, okay, so I know there is a dire situation there, what do I do now? And this is our attempt to call people to do something. It's only the beginning, by the way. We are going to escalate now by the day. But unfortunately, not all Israelis know that this is the reality. If you look at the news, you don't see it. If you look at the Channel 12 or Khan or Channel 13, it is not in the media that 100 people die there a day, die or get killed by our army. It's not in the media.
And here's what Alon Lee said after Linda asked him about the level of awareness of Gaza starvation by the average Israeli.
I think that ever since the ceasefire stopped on March, there is a voice of recognizing the suffering of the Palestinian, the death that we're causing. People ask why? Why are we going back to Gaza? Why are we sending our children back to kill and get killed in Gaza? And as the weeks pass and people promise us there's going to be a ceasefire, we're going to release the hostages, and it doesn't happen, and what we get instead is more death and killing and starvation, I think this is the turning point. People understand that it's killing for the sake of killing, that it's starvation for the sake of starvation. And yes, that what we do right now in Gaza is annihilation. Is annihilation as a policy.
Linda, at the risk of sounding cold or cynical, how much of the concern for hungry and starving and suffering Gazans feel to you like a worry by Jewish Israelis about Israel's image in the world, about its deterioration of relationships with allies, about the strategic disadvantage of being perceived as killing and starving Gazans? And how much from what you feel on the streets is genuine humanitarian concern and worry? And how does this combine with the concern about the hostages and about Israeli soldiers dying in Gaza?
The other day I was at the pharmacy and I heard 2, I guess, teenage girls or women in their early 20s at most talking to each other. And they were talking about an international celebrity of some sort. And one said, well, he's anti-Israel. And the other said, well, I mean, look at everything. I would be too if I didn't live here. And these were just like the most average Israelis having a very average Israeli conversation. There is a knowledge of the way that we're being perceived. I think it also, depends on person by person. I can't necessarily say, and I also don't think there's much of a benefit in drawing the line of like, well, why do you care about this pressing humanitarian issue? I think if anyone is going out and saying something and saying this has to stop, then whether it's self-serving or it's because of a very personal, empathetic reaction, at the end of the day, it leads to the same place, which is hopefully action. And worst case scenario, nothing. But either way, they're putting themselves on the line, and they are countering what was kind of a very well-accepted talking point up until fairly recently of the Gazans aren't starving, there's a lot of aid, Hamas is just taking it, the Hamas terrorists are eating very well, and they're just exploiting children who have pre-existing health conditions for sympathy. So these are people who are, taking a stance and saying, we have to end this. And in the same way as, any other conflict around the world, I think it's also kind of legitimate to say, we look terrible and we're losing friends, and therefore we need to act differently. Sure, it might be cold to say it, but at the end of the day, the important thing is that living people who can be saved are saved. Whether they be Gazan children who are struggling for meals, the average person who just wants to go about their day-to-day life, the hostages who are in the tunnels of Gaza, whoever it may be, the most important thing is human life. And however we get there, the most important thing is that we do.
I'm going to ask you finally the same question I asked Nagham. Do you think this is a blip? Do you think that these kinds of demonstrations over concern for the Gazans will continue? And do you think they will grow?
From what I've seen and heard from people who are involved in these protests and what's being said at the protests themselves, the message is that this is only the beginning. There are only going to be more and more of these protests. And considering the hostage protest that you had on Saturday night, which was in ridiculous heat and terrible humidity, and 50,000 people still came, according to the organizers. It really shows that there is a need for people to make their calls heard, no matter what their cause may be. I have a feeling there's only going to be more and more of these until something changes, until something happens. And I like to think that the current humanitarian pause that was announced, effective as it may be or not, even if it's just announced to placate people, is partially because some people are listening to the street, or at least I want to hope so.
We'll end on that hopeful note. Linda, thank you too for your hard work and reporting in the heat and humidity, night after night, protest after protest. Thanks, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guests, Haaretz reporters Nagham Zbeedat and Linda Diane, and to producer and editor Nara Malkin. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode of the podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so inclined, give us a 5-star rating so more people can find us. And for all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, please subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.